The arrival of the Amandebele in Matabililand and the succession of King Lobengula. When Mzilikazi left the Transvaal one they all came together to the Limpopo. Just before the Limpopo, they parted into two sections. Mzilikazi told Gundwane, one of his principal indunas, to take Nkulamane III with him and carry out Moffat's instructions, that is, travel with the sun on his right cheek in the morning and on his left cheek in the afternoon, and keep on until they reach a range of granite hills, and he said, if there is any disobedience among my people, you have my leave to kill them. Lobengula was then about the age when they look after the goats, that is, about 7 years old. For Nkulamane was born in Zululand and at that time was just reaching the age of puberty. Gundwane and Nkulamane followed out these instructions. There is a hill in the Gwanda district called Isizaza, and they traveled to the east of that, and then they struck up along the foothills on the eastern side of the Matapos 5 and eventually landed at what we know today as the Bushtik Mine 6, which they called NDEBELE'S 7, and settled there. Lobengula was with this crowd. Jibiklegzu was the name of the place that Lobengula's people came from in Zululand. There was no Induna of that name. At NDEBELE they arrived before the rains started, when the first leaves come out in September, and they built their huts. The regiments that came with Gundwane were called according to the section of Zululand they came from. They were Mzinyati, Nkanankana, Uyengu, Matshej, Godliwayo, Zinkondo, and Gwikwi. Sipiza, Insingo, Jibiklegzu, and Makanda. The regiments that came up with Mzilikazi were Matabililand, Izizinda, Amambambo, Misiza, Ilanga, Mfagokba, Nkani, Kumalo, Mpungo, and Magoko, who amalgamated into the Magokwini and Inyenda. These were the regiments that went to the west with the king. Lobengula entered the Amashlagoshlago regiment. Lobengula was able to walk when he came into the country. He was born at Nkwala in the year they first clashed with the Boers. 8 When we clashed with the Boers, it was the Boers who made the first raid on us. Mzilikazi's first kraal in the Transvaal was in the Magaliesberg. It was called by them Amananji. The district was called Nkwala. This was where Moffat IX visited Mzilikazi. Gundwane settles at Ntabanenda near the site of Falcon College. Gundwane came and settled at Ntabenda. Mzilikazi split off and traveled northwest into the Makarakari salt pan. 10 Mzilikazi did his own scouting, and as far as I have heard he wanted to settle in the pick of the country, and he told Gundwane to carry out Moffat's instructions, while he went north to the salt pans. 11 Then he came back and came through what we know as the Bulalima district. 12 Gundwane's people got word of his trek from the Makalanga that his forces were there, and sent a regiment down to meet the king and to tell him that they had found the place that Moffat had told them of. Moffat had told them, your objective is a flat-topped hill which is where the waters divide, the channels being the Zambezi and the Limpopo. So, they sent for the king to bring him up to this place, Antabazinduna, while they settled about 10 or 12 miles away from it. They would not go to the spot before the king. Mzilikazi came through Bulalima, raiding all the way and collecting slaves, and Gundwane met him at the Amanzamniama river, and Gundwane brought him to Antabazinduna. Here Mzilikazi made his first kraal right on top of the hill. He arrived in the autumn, too late to plow, so he raided all around among the Makalanga and lived on them. They were just ready to reap. In the winter of the same year he moved down to a place not very far from the junction of the Umgasa and the Kos rivers. Mwila Hill, locally the first kraal was known as Mkuna, Mariula Tree, next was Spungwini, then his next kraal was the one where he died, Matabililand. The district was known as Sigoteni. Return of Mzilikazi. When the king came back with the regiment, all his people came from Ntabenda to Antabazinduna. to greet him and then went back to their own kraals. The Jibiklegs who were at Entebenda, they lived for a time there. Then liars went to the king and said that Gundwane had proclaimed Nkulamane king during his absence and before he came to Entebezinduna. I don't know anything about Umoka being mixed up in it. Whenever a king married, his wife took a vow to be faithful, but I don't think Umoka broke her vow. The doctors, not the witch doctors but the Izinianga 13 went out and got medicines and the queen at her marriage had to drink the medicine they prepared and swear her vow, because she may possibly bear a king. Umoka had 2 children only, Nkulamane and Lomadlozi. She was the right-hand wife and she had the right-hand kraal, the kraal of the heir-bearer. The mother of Lobengula was Fulada. Both belonged to the Jibiklegzu kraal. Fulada was the next wife 14 to Umoka in order of precedence. Lobengula was her only child. Story of the robes and Nkulamane. When liars went to Mzilikaza with their story of Gundwane, Mzilikaza called up all his sons, all that might through accident become kings, that is, the eldest sons of his various wives. Their names were Nkulamane, Mangwane, Lopila, Chyugisa. 15 Lobengula was too young then. He was a well-knit boy, but not as old as the others and he had not yet been enrolled in a regiment. Mzilikaza gathered these young men and told them to sit down here, took his ox skin robe off and said to Mangwane, hand me that robe. Mangwane tried to lift the robe and said, Father, I can't lift it. Then Mzilikaza called to Lopila to bring the robe and so went through them all and each one was unable to lift the robe until it came to the turn of Nkulamane who lifted the robe and handed it to Mzilikaza. The king said, How is it that you are able to lift this robe which I treated with my medicine? And the others have been unable to? There must be something in the rumors that I have heard that you wish to usurp the throne. I gather from this that the rumors I have heard are true. Nkulamane banished from Matabililand. Then Mzilikaza banished Nkulamane. He told Hwaba and Ngumbata 16 to take Nkulamane over the border down to the Limpopo and then take him down to Shepstone. 17 As far as we know this was done, but when Ngumbata returned, they spread the story they had killed Nkulamane, and they were told to spread the story by the king. Mzilikaza knew they had not killed him, but he wanted the people to think so. Gundwane was sent for by the king and refuted the whole story and denied that he had anything to do with it. But the king said, I have already proved by my medicines that you did corrupt Nkulamane. Gundwane returned and Mzilikaza sent a party to kill him at his home which was at Mputjini, about 6 kilometers from Entebenda and about 16 kilometers from Entebezinduna. Mzilikaza was then at Mwila Hill. A large number of people were killed, all the Jibiklegzu kraal, but he did not kill Fulada as she died. Before this happened, Lobengula was taken down to Mwila Hill, which he calls Matabililand. 5 men killed Gundwane and then a larger body was sent to kill the others. Lobengula was not hidden away. The king gave orders that he was to be brought back and when he was enrolled in the Amashlagoshlago he was at Mwila Hill. Told the story that the Indunas were killed at Entebezinduna, Entebini asks for the name of any Induna who was killed at Entebezinduna. J.P. Richardson says that apparently no one can name any. Later in the interview Entebini states that he knows nothing of the story that Lobengula was hidden in a grain bin. While Mzilikaza was at Entebezinduna, on top of the mountain, he had called up his Indunas and allocated the various districts they were to occupy. Lobengula's escape from the killing of the Jibiklegzu. Lobengula was kept at Igozolani by Gwebalanda, but it was not true that Gwebalanda kept Lobengula as his own son. He had instructions from Mzilikaza, he kept Lobengula herding for some time. He was first given the calves to herd and later the more responsible work of herding the grown cattle. Guabalanda kept him there until he was enrolled in the Amashlagoshlago regiment. Lobengula enrolled. Lobengula enrolled in the Amashlagoshlago and with them was stationed not very far from the original kraal below the junction of the Umgasa and Kos rivers. The Amashlagoshlago were popularly known as the Inyoni Yamashlenga, the Zulu name for weaver birds. Lobengula did not come into contact with white people then, only after he became king. The people were then looking for the return of Nkulamane as their king. The search for Nkulamane. When Mzilikazi died I was very young, 18, but the death was only announced when the councillors thought fit. All the Indunas had a great meeting and said, "What are we to do?" It was decided they should send for Nkulamane. They sent Lodge 19 and Mishlaba, son of Ngumbata, and they started from here on horseback. But the Boers said to them, "You cannot take your horses, we are not taking them away from you, but we cannot allow you to take any kind of war material with you, so you must go on foot. You can travel with switches, but you must not carry anything warlike." The Boers were very good to them. They went down to a point near Umgungundlovia 20 and they met an old woman who said to them, "I see that you are Abajadai, my people, I see that you are of my people by the way your ears are cut." The Amandebele used to pierce the earlobes in a particular way. "Where have you come from?" They said, "We have come from Mzilikazi," and the woman said, "We hear that Mzilikazi is dead," and they said, "It is quite true, and we have come down here on a quest." And the woman said, "Who are you looking for?" And they replied, "We are looking for Nkulamane." This woman had been left behind when Mzilikazi left Zululand, and she said, "I see a likeness in Mishlaba to a man I once knew who was called Mevana." This was the eldest son of Ngumbata, who was since died. Lodge said, "Yes, this is his younger brother." And the old woman said, "If you are looking for Nkulamane, you are very near your goal." And then she said, "Why are you looking for him, when your father Ngumbata robbed him of his blanket and left him naked when he was told to deliver him to Shepstone? I am surprised that you should come down to get him, when before you delivered him to Shepstone, you took away his leopard skin kaross." The emissaries returned to Matabililand without Nkulamane. When Mishlaba heard this, he decided to turn back and said to Lodge, "I am going back." And Lodge said, "I am only here as your heirs, I am not in charge of this expedition." So, they turned back without seeing Nkulamane. Mishlaba and Lodge, 21, the leaders, the people who had been given the road, came right back, and the Boers gave them back their horses and assegais. When they arrived in Matabeleland, they reported to Ngumbata that they had met this woman and that Mishlaba had got a fright because the woman said, "Your father robbed Nkulamane of his robe, and I wonder why you, his son, should be sent back to fetch him." Ngumbata appoints Lobengula as king of the Amandebele. When he heard this, Ngumbata concluded that if he re-established Nkulamane as king he would be killed, and he said, "There are other branches of the king's family." Then all communication with the south was stopped and they did not send again. Ngumbata said, "There is still another of the Jibiklegzu," meaning there was Lobengula. Then Ngumbata approached Lobengula, and Lobengula said, "Well, you sent emissaries to get my brother Nkulamane, now why have you picked on me?" Then Ngumbata lied to Lobengula and said, "I know perfectly well that it was the desire of your father that you should be king." Ngumbata was the appointer of kings. Now in the time of Mzilikazi, Mashusha 22 sent a gun to Mzilikazi, who said, "Who is going to carry this gun?" So Mzondo, the man who brought the gun, said, "I don't know as much as you know about your family." And Mzilikazi said, "The only man that I can give it to is Lobengula." This was after Nkulamane had been sent away, and Ngumbata made use of this to support his story. Controversy over the appointment of Lobengula as king. Then Lobengula was appointed king, but he said, "What about my brother? He is still alive, as far as I know." Ngumbata said, "No, he is not alive as far as we are concerned." Lobengula went on objecting until many headmen came and persuaded him to take over the kingship. All agreed except Umbigo and Lomapela. They objected because they said the king had told them individually that Nkulamane was to be his successor. Umbigo's role. It is true that Umbigo fought against Hendrik Potgieter and that Mzilikazi thought highly of him. It is true that the Zwanjandaba refused to come to the funeral of Mzilikazi because of their hostility to Lobengula. They refused to come during the time the body was in the hut, but they turned up for the actual funeral. It is not true that the Zwanjandaba wanted Umbigo to be king. This was only a rumor. Some of the Zwanjandaba who did not want Lobengula to be king said it would be better if Umbigo became king. But Umbigo would not entertain the idea and said they must wait for Nkulamane. Zwanjandaba battle. Lobengula was then at Spungwini. He sent a message to the Zwanjandaba, Ingibo, and Induba regiments saying he wanted to see them, and they refused to come. They sent 3 men, Pashla, Dingana, and Vilagubi, with a reply saying, "We want to come and pick mbuya, wild spinach." This was meant to signify they had come to ask for peace. The Amandebele had a rule that the people were not allowed to pick green food or harvest until they got word that the king's lands were harvested. So Lobengula said, "Have they left their homes? Are they on their way to see me? Have they crossed the Bimbisi river?" The messengers replied, "No, they are still at their homes." Whereupon Lobengula said, "Well, if they are still at home, I am coming to fetch them." Then the great battle took place. Lobengula gathered his troops and camped right up against them on the Bimbisi river. Then 2 men, Mitlatuzani and Somadaga, were sent to Umbigo 23 by Lobengula to say he was there and to ask Umbigo to come and see him. When these people returned to Lobengula, they said, "We have come back shivering because we thought Umbigo was going to kill us." In the meantime, Umbigo had gathered his 3 regiments at his kraal, which was on the Bimbisi river, near the Turk mine, and Lobengula said, "Oh, if that is so, strike your flint, rub your fire sticks 24 and let us be going." Lobengula mounted his horse, rode up to Umbigo's kraal and fired 2 shots out of his double-barreled gun with the whole of his impi beside him, and then the fight started. Tigan, Nomabale, and Zigwana were the 3 that went with him, all mounted. Lobengula rode right up to the kraal gate, put his gun between the upright poles of the gate and fired 2 shots. Sototwana was badly wounded and another was killed on the spot. The kraal was fenced all around with a high stockade. Then Zigwana grabbed his bridle reins and said, "This is our business, not yours." 25. How Bulawayo got its name. Lobengula called his town Bulawayo because after he was made king, he collected all the survivors of those who were killed at Jibiklegzu, some who had escaped, and some descended from women who had left the kraal, and he established them in a kraal where government house now is. He said, "I am not going to call you the Jibiklegzu anymore, I am going to call you Ko Bulawayo." Which means the people who were to have been killed, but they were not killed. It applies to Lobengula himself, because he was to have been killed and Gwabalanda saved him. Lobengula first built a kraal at Inugini, the other side of Hope Fountain. It was then he changed the name of the people to Ko Bulawayo. When he moved to the site of the present government house, he took the name with him. By Ko Bulawayo, Lobengula was referring to the people of Jibiklegzu, so those who survived were called Ko Bulawayo, but the name included everyone, those who were killed as well as those that survived. Search for Nkulamane. When the meeting took place, Nkulamane told the people that Nkulamane was dead. But Lodge and Mishlaba said this was not so, because they had heard in Natal that he was still alive. Nkulamane died at Mpugini, 26, which is on the other side of Kama's country. Nkulamane's invasion. Nkulamane came up with the remnant of his people, who were scattered in the Zwanjandaba fight, to the Gwanda district to Isize as a hill, and he established himself there. He even built huts. 27 Then he sent messengers throughout the country to tell the people to come to their rightful people, and Lobengula had them killed. Then Lobengula sent down a big force to destroy them. When they got near, all the leaders said to the regiments, "Stay here and we will go down and interview Nkulamane." They had an interview with him and returned, but they advised Nkulamane to get out of the country as the force behind them would annihilate him. In the meantime, some people of the Ndaba went down to meet Nkulamane with 40 head of cattle. But the king's forces arrived before them. The Indunas went over to Nkulamane and said, "We can't kill you, or we don't want to kill you. Go." The next morning the regiments were ordered by the Indunas to attack Nkulamane. The Indunas were making a pretense of an attack really, and when they reached the camp, they found the logs still burning, but Nkulamane and his people were gone. The regiments said they could not have gone very far and wanted to follow, and the Indunas said, "No, they are leaving the country. Let us go back and tell Lobengula." On the way back, they met the Ndaba with 40 head of cattle and took the cattle, killing 6 men. Death of Ntunza. When they returned, Lobengula ordered the Nduna Ntunza to be killed because he had not carried out his orders and killed Nkulamane. Ntunza was killed as soon as he returned, because he had warned Nkulamane to get out. The king blamed Ntunza and Umtigan for giving Nkulamane warning. But he kept Umtigan, who was married to Lobengula's sister, Makwa. Umtigan was killed years afterwards because of this incident. Richardson says the Amandebele had a custom whereby when the king had marked out an Nduna to be killed, he fattened him for 3 or 4 years. When Nkulamane left Matabeleland, the time he was banished, both his eyes were all right so far as I know. I never heard that the Nkulamane who came up to claim the throne had something wrong with his eyes. Lobengula reproaches Mishlaba. Nkulamane died after the Zwanjandaba battle, and then Mishlaba succeeded him. Lobengula said to Mishlaba, "When you made me king, did you only give half the power? Why is it that I have no sons?" Also, he had gout, and he accused Mishlaba of this, as representing his father. Mishlaba said, "No, I didn't." Then Lobengula said, "If you didn't give the full power to me, for whom are you hiding it?" Mishlaba said, "Nkulamane said I must not give you full power because Nkulamane might come back." Then Lobengula ordered Mishlaba and all his people to be killed, but some escaped. 5 men were killed, sons and brothers of Mishlaba. This happened not very long before the coming of the white people, about 3 years before. Nkulamane was the appointer of the king. His father was Kolo, then came Nkulamane, and then came Mishlaba. This family inherited the right to appoint the king, but although one man proclaimed the king, he acted in committee with the councillors, Nkulamane and Nkulamane. It is not true that Nkulamane hit Nkulamane with a knobkerrie and left him for dead. But it is true that he reported to Mzilikazi that he had killed him. The truth came out when Mzilikazi saw Nkulamane one day. It was a cold day, wearing the leopard skin robe, and he looked at him. Mzilikazi spoke to Kwabalanda and Mahabahaba, 2 old councillors, and told them, "This man has done me an injury. I cannot understand this, because I sent Nkulamane to hide my son away, and now I find he is wearing his robe." But he said nothing to Nkulamane. Instead he sent for Hwaba and said, "Was my son killed?" Hwaba said, "No." Then the king knew that Nkulamane was still alive. He did not send Ngumbata back with the robe. Ngumbata kept the robe. When Mzilikazi spoke to Hwaba about the matter, he said, "How is it that I saw Ngumbata wearing Nkulamane's robe?" Hwaba said, "When Ngumbata robbed Nkulamane of his robe, he said to him, 'This is the robe by which kings are to be appointed in the future.'" But Ngumbata was not speaking the truth, because really, he wanted the robe, and he made the excuse that he wanted it because he had to have it to appoint the future king. Afterwards Mzilikazi told Gwabalanda and Mahabahaba that it was all right. Death of Lodge. It was Lodge that told Lobengula that the white people were stronger than the Amandebele. The meeting at which Lodge told the king and the people not to fight the white people took place at Umvacha. After Lodge returned from his trip, at the meeting Lodge said, "Don't quarrel with these people, rather pay them tax than try to fight if the question arises, because there are many of them and their weapons are powerful." All the other Indunas were angry and objected to what Lodge had said. They said, "Did the white man send you to tell us to Tila? Pay tribute/tax?" Lodge said, "No, this is no message, I am telling you this to open the king's eyes only, in case of what might happen in future, to Vasa arouse/awaken to open the king's eyes to the possibility of troubles that might arise in the future." All the Indunas, young and old, protested. They did not, however, suggest that Lodge was selling them to the white people. Lodge had previously told C. Combo, a minor Induna, of the danger, and C. Combo had promised to support him at the meeting. But when C. Combo saw the outburst of the Indunas, his heart failed him, and he remained silent. Lodge was alone against them. This thing kept on rankling in their minds for a long time, perhaps years, and eventually the Indunas persuaded the king that Lodge should be killed. Lobengula liked Lodge, who was one of his greatest generals, and he did not want to kill him, but eventually he gave in to the perpetual nagging of the Indunas, who said Lodge was too friendly towards the white people. Lobengula's farewell to his people at Shangani. Antabini records at the end of his account, when Lobengula was grieving about not taking Lodge's advice, he said to the Indunas, "Now we come back to Lodge's warning. You wouldn't allow me to Tila to the white people pay tribute or make a treaty, and today, this man has a regiment, that man has a regiment, I have got nothing." He said this at Shangani before he left, and he said, addressing Bozongwane, who had been responsible in having a lot of people killed, being the king's Inyanga. 28 Bozongwane, you were the man who caused so many people to be killed by telling lies about them. Today the people are blaming me for those, but you were the root of the trouble. When Lobengula had said this to the whole crowd of people there, he got on his horse with Magwegwe, Gwadi, Mishani, the three principal Indunas with him, and with the body of the people, whose hearts wanted to go with him and who followed him. They were not a picked body, and the queens who were there went too, and he disappeared, and no one knew what happened to him. I don't know if he died of smallpox. References. The above oral statements were taken by Foster Windram, with the help of J.P. Richardson and Peter Kumalo, when he was a journalist at the Bulawayo Chronicle in 1937, with those persons in their home kraals who had personal knowledge of the events that had taken place. There are copies at the National Archives of Zimbabwe, CR2/1/1/Bulawayo Library, and with Alan Windram, who very kindly lent me his copy.